Hi all, it's Jill Sprott here with this week's Scrap Your Stash video. Every Thursday at 2 Peas in a Bucket, there's a new Scrap Your Stash video. The whole premise is to use product in a new and fresh way, and in doing so, gradually work your way through your stash. And it isn't just about challenging you, it's about challenging me as well. Everybody who participates in these videos really has to dig deep in the stash and find ways of stretching product. And so this week's challenge is a really unusual one. It's actually inspired by a chat that occurred this past weekend on the 2Ps message board. One of the people who posted to the chat that I hosted requested that I find ways of using Christmas paper, basically repurposing holiday paper for non-holiday layouts. And that is exactly what my task is today. So I began by digging deep into my stash, pretty deep, and pulling out every single Christmas paper and product that I had and really looking at it with fresh eyes. So my project began with a photo. It's always where I begin, and the story behind the photo. This layout will relate to my Uncle Chester, who has special needs. And so I talk a lot about growing up with an uncle like that and how it gave me perspective. But it began with the supplies. So I took the photo of him and I put it against every single paper in my stash. Because I really, it's difficult to deal with all of these Christmas patterns. And so I actually was playing with the colors on his shirt. If you notice, there's orange and green on his shirt. So I held it against every single paper until I found papers that really worked. And then I started pulling out accents. So I have a lot of October afternoon brads and doodads. And if you notice, some of them aren't really Christmassy. They actually have just a basic green background, and so I decided to pull those to the side. Same thing with the tags. If you notice, some of them are simple. I mean, they're really not necessarily specifically Christmas. So I pulled out like a date taken label, and then as I was going through, I realized one of the things I can do is flip these things over. I don't have to use the Christmas side. You can actually use these things all year long. Flip them over and use them for journaling tags. And so that's where I got the idea to actually dig into a piece of miscellany, into this packet miscellany from the Make It Merry collection, and I didn't just use the little buttons that I pulled out here, but I actually pulled out some journaling cards that I know I will never use. Living in Hawaii, am I really going to use cards that say things like snow and snowman? Probably not, but the back sides are pretty cool, so I decided to incorporate my journaling on those cards. In addition to those journaling cards, I pulled out a bunch of buttons from the Make It Merry collection. That was also an item that somebody challenged me to use on the thread this past weekend. Alright, on to the journaling cards. So what I do is I lay them all out, tried to figure out how much space I have to work with for the journaling. So these, for instance, are 3 inches by 1.5 inches. And then I make sure that the journaling is set to that on my word processing program. And I run it through the printer. After I do that, I make sure that I can fit the journaling cards in the right places without them being crooked. So what I do is I draw these kind of guidelines on the paper, little boxes around the actual text. I make sure that the lines go a little bit over so that I can see them peeking out when I place the card over. And then I take a little piece of double-sided tape, and I place it over the journaling section. So I know exactly where the journaling will stop and start. And I run it through the printer one more time, remove the cards, and that's it. Alright, so with the journaling out of the way, with the photo selected, the colors selected, now it's time to assemble the layout itself. And so this was a little tricky. There are a lot of greens in Christmas paper, but the patterns are definitely Christmas in orientation. They're very holiday and winter centered. So snowflakes. Was I really going to use snowflakes? Actually, I was. I want to make them not actually look like snowflakes. So what I did was I cut one into strips, actually taking off little edges of the snowflake so that it wouldn't be distinguishable as a snowflake. It would just come out to be this cute green design. And so after cutting out the strip, I got the idea to incorporate a few more strips on the layout. And so I pulled together different patterns. I knew that the red in the paper really wasn't going to work, so I worked around that. But I went for more neutral colors and greens. And so I pieced those together strip by strip. So the greens were used to really accentuate the green in the shirt. Notice though there isn't much orange. The only orange you see kind of peeking out there is from a sheet of October Afternoon Make It Merry paper. The B-sides are really invaluable here. For instance, this is another piece of Make It Merry paper. I just wanted that little neutral section at the bottom, so there's really kind of a mix. If it was all green, it would be a little overwhelming, but there's still not enough orange, and so I tried to figure out what to do to compensate, and this was it. I would include some mist. This is a jack-o'-lantern sprinklers, witch hazel sprinklers, so maybe I get extra brownie points for not just using Christmas products but Halloween as well. And so I decided to take that orange cardstock background and build the layout on that. The mist will come in later. And so I just began by laying strips out. In fact, usually it takes me a lot longer to kind of tweak a design, but I really like the way that the alternating sizes of strips worked here with the photo. And so I figured one side of the layout would be these strips of varying sizes, and the other side of the layout would have a little more orange on it. And so you can kind of see here my process for moving things around, just trying to figure out where things go. Notice that no matter where I place that photo, you can kind of see the rule of thirds applying. So you imagine, for instance, two grid lines running through the top of the paper and two grid lines running, through the sides. So vertical and horizontally, if you imagine the paper cut into thirds. And so the subject's face is always where those lines intersect. It's just a habit I have of placing the photo that way. And so here I am adding different strips to the paper, and you'll see here that that chevron strip that I have, it actually doesn't make it to the final layout. If you notice here, it's actually kind of distracting. I mean, I love it so much, but it just doesn't quite work. And that's kind of, I guess, the tricky decision-making process inherent in what we do. But you just play around. That's exactly what this period is. It's just a matter of mixing and matching and playing and see what appeals to your eye. There's really no hard and fast rules. So you see here, I'm trying to place the journaling cards, and it's just not working. I keep mixing and matching and moving them around. It's that space between the second and third that's bugging me. And so what I do as I go through this layout is try to find a way of rectifying that. Bringing things closer together always works, and so that's what I did here. Clustering is a great art, I guess. It really makes design sense. And so the other thing I decided to do here was use the strips not just kind of in the background, but in the foreground as well, tucking things in here and there. This way, I guess the whole design is kind of unified. Everything is touching in some way. Everything is converging. And so what I do is, as I create layouts so that, I guess I'm fickle. I change my mind a lot. I use double-sided tape to adhere just the little edges down, so that if I decide to move something around, I can do it, without ruining the layout or being unhappy with my choices. So you can see here, I'm just sticking tape here and there to adhere different sections of the layout down. The problem is, what I've forgotten in the process is that I was going to add that mist. And so, a good thing for double-sided tape. Once it finally dawns on me that I wanted to use orange mist for the background, I decided to grab that scrap sheet of paper that I initially printed the journaling on and my nasty-looking all-purpose misting box, and I covered the journaling so that I don't get splatters on it with that scratch paper. Shake up my mist bottle, lightly uncap it, but I kind of keep the cap on, shake a bit, and drip, drip, drip. I don't really have a method to this other than to sort of go crazy. At times I can be more controlled, but in this case I just wanted a lot of orange to kind of counteract the prevalence of green and add a little pop to the page. After adding the mist, I tucked the photo back in, but as I was looking at the page, I love the way the corners of the photo kind of stood up, and so I decided to add some pop dots just to keep that kind of dimension there behind the photo. So I added one at the top and the bottom of the photo. Usually at this point in the process, I would start heading toward my sewing machine, and so I started thinking about what thread I was going to use. Orange seemed to come to mind, and the reason being is that there still didn't seem to be quite enough. But before adding the sewing, I decided to add a few more elements to the page, like the little date label from OA that I had pulled out at the very beginning. I used a stamp from Amy Tangerine, and I inked it using some Doodlebug ink. I love the brightness of that green. And so I tucked it in to one of the strips using craft glue to adhere it. And so after adding that strip, I started looking a bit more at my accents that I had set to the side, and I decided to pull in a few borders. Those are from the Crate Papers Christmas collection, Sleigh Ride. And so I just tucked a border right behind the photo. You can't actually see the Christmas writing on it, but it's still a Christmas product, so it counts. And then I also added another piece just behind the photo. But one of the things that I don't really like about those borders is that the edges are more square, so I usually trim the corners into circles so that there's scallops going from beginning to end without interruption. And so I took that new kind of newly trimmed scallop border sticker and I tucked it behind the photo. It's gray in color, so it actually is a nice kind of neutral addition to the mix of green and bright orange. After adding a few of those accent stickers, I ran the page through the sewing machine using a combination of straight stitches and zigzag stitches. I love zigzags. In fact, I love putting them in places where two papers intersect. I'm not sure if you can see it clearly here, but you can see it on the final layout that I added some zigzags. And then I decided to also use brads, another challenge mentioned. And I know it was used in a previous Scrap Your Stash challenge, so I'm following suit. And so I incorporated a bunch of brads and a bunch of those buttons that I had pulled out early in the process. I wasn't quite sure where to put them. Usually I would create a little border banner using them, a garland, sorry, or I would cluster them together. But in this case, I staggered them here and there in places where the strips met. And so they kind of overlap here and there. And then it was time to add the title. The title for me always is drawn from kind of overall feeling that I get from the page, but it's usually based on a word that I use in the journaling or an idea that's repeated. So in the journaling, I talked a lot about this idea of being special and how, you know, some kids will use the term special for people with special needs in a kind of derogatory way. So growing up, you know, there was always that to face, you know, hearing kids talk about, you know, people with special needs this way, but at the same time knowing that I had someone like that in my family, and it was a hurtful thing. But this layout focuses on this idea of being special, and it talks about the way that my Uncle Chester really changed our lives because of his presence in our family. And so for the title letters, I used some letters from Amy Tangerine's American Crafts line. And the reason why I chose that particular color rather than kind of, you know, orange or green letters or even black, I didn't want it to be too bold. The letters you can't see really well here, but although they look gray, they actually have kind of a greenish tinge to them. And so they work really well with the page. When I decided to add the word special, I staggered the letters here and there. I guess in a way it's a comment on this idea of being different, kind of standing out in a noticeable way. But at the same time, you know, that kind of those staggered letters up and down, they just remind me in a way of, you know, of children, their innocence. They have a really playful feel to them. And for me, that's my Uncle Chester. You know, he's the guy that I grew up with. As really a playmate, watching cartoons together. You know, him making his Donald Duck voices, making me laugh, and you know, he really was just one of the kids growing up, and he's still the same way today. You know, he's just great to have around. And so, in looking at the layout, this is usually the part of the process that it's kind of difficult because this is where I have to decide. Okay, am I done? Do I stop? Do I need to add anything? What do I add? And so I usually look for kind of gaps or spaces in the layout. For me, this area near the title was one particular area that I felt needed something. And so I used the acrylic stamps from the Maggie Holmes Pieces of Me kit that's found at 2 Peas in a Bucket. I love the exclusive stamps that come with it. That little heart is adorable. And so I decided to kind of incorporate a few triangles here and there. So there's 3 hearts on the page. You can kind of see a triangle that they form. And then I decided to kind of depart from the Christmas products and work in some new ones. You know, mixing old and new always makes me happy. And so I worked in a few Studio Calico Darling Deer hearts, and I thought the page could use even more dimension, and so I decided rather than putting them just straight on the page, I backed each one with a little pop dot. And so again, forming another triangle. So you can see one next to the word so, and one above special. And then I add a third one to complete that triangle along the way. And so there's sort of intersecting triangles throughout the layout come together. So, you look back just a few moments, and in a way the layout felt incomplete, and now it totally feels complete to me. And I'm really proud of it. I think it really captures my Uncle Chester's playful spirit and his merriness. Now it's your turn to scrap your stash. What you want to do is gather together all of your Christmas paper and all of your holiday products and use them for non-Christmas, non-holiday layouts. Use that stash in a creative way, and in doing so, inspire us by sharing what you come up with. At the end of the month, we'll draw a winner from the challenge participants for that month, and the reward will be a $10 gift certificate so that you can continue to build up your stash even as you use it. Good luck, and thanks for joining me.